Well, thank you everybody for joining today's Hawaii Island Chamber Economic Development Committee meeting. We're very happy to have Franny Brewer, who's the manager of Bay Island Invasive Species Committee, here to present on some of the invasive species work that we're doing here on Hawaii Island, as well as some of the concerns that we have regarding some of our major invasive species affecting our ecosystem and ultimately, the economic output uh, for the agriculture industry. Um, so before we get Franny on, let's just do a quick round of introductions. I'm Dennis. I'm the chair of this committee, as well as the vice president and upcoming president-elect for the Chamber of Commerce. Carla, you can do a quick intro.
Hi, Carla Poole, Executive Officer, Hawaii Island Chamber of Commerce.
Okay, Alan.
Hi, Alan Okinaka. I'm retired, started, whichever, and I'm up in Waikikuka.
Thank you. Miles.
Hi, everybody. Miles Yoshioka, retired,
Happily retired.
and homeowner up in Kaumana.
Thank you. Glenn.
Aloha, I'm Glenn Cogameter, retired, and also live in Waikioka, kind of close to the island. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Christian.
Hi, everyone. Christian Wong, Executive Director of the Hawaii Science and Technology Museum.
Thank you. Julie.
Aloha, everyone. Julie Maurer, Director of the Center for Community Engagement at UH-Hilo.
Thank you. Keith.
Hey, Keith Merrick, current president, Hawaii Island Chamber of Commerce and financial advisor with Edward Jones.
Thank you. Michelle.
Aloha, Michelle ICK, County Employee R&D Business Development.
Thank you. John.
John Miata, work for Huhonua Bioenergy.
Thank you. Nimmer.
Aloha, Nimmer Tamimi, engineering partners and board member, Hawaii Island Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. Leah Aloha.
Hi, aloha. I am Lei for short. I am a senior placement manager at Ultras.
Thank you. Dina.
Aloha kako. Dana DeSoto, Vibrant Hawaii Work-Based Learning Coordinator. Mahalo.
Thank you. Chelsea.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea Chow. I'm a program officer at Haole Maloa Foundation and also on the chamber board.
Thank you. Doug. Okay, we'll skip Doug. And Lori.
Aloha, I'm Laurie Okami. I'm with R&D as an economic development specialist.
Thank you. David.
Sorry, my camera's not working. Hi, Franny, Dave Carr from Owana Electric.
Okay, and I think everybody else is using their AIs to record this meeting, so we'll skip those and then go straight to Franny. Thank you, Franny.
Yeah, I'm Franny Brewer, and I'm the manager of the Big Island Invasive Species Committee, which is part of the University of Hawaii. So I'm going to just start sharing right away. Give me a second here because we are on Canva, so I have to get it a little bit at a time. Okay. All right. Everybody see the screen? Okay, good. All right, so there's my email if you want to reach out to me later, but basically I'm gonna just start by talking about invasive species in general, what that even is, because there's a lot of confusion sometimes around the term, and then kind of narrow down onto what we do and give you an introduction to exactly what BISC is. And then at the end, we're going to talk really specifically about one headline invasive species that you've probably heard of, which is coconut rhinoceros beetle, because that one is kind of unfortunately a hot topic right now for invasive species here. So any discussion of invasive species, we need to start with place. So we're going to start with sort of centering ourselves right here in Hawaii. which is the most distant archipelago in the world. We are 2,000 miles away from the nearest continental system. And if you remember back to your high school biology classes, right? The evolution of organisms coming from other organisms, right? Emergence of life. We didn't really have access to a lot of those organisms that evolved on continental systems. We are just a series of lava hotspots here in the islands, been bubbling for millions of years. So how do we end up with terrestrial species, right? If we just have this middle of the ocean, 2,000 miles away from anything else. And what we like to say is you have the three W's: wind, wings, or waves. Before humans started coming to the islands, the ancestors of what we call our native species, they were able to come in one of these three ways. And those were the only ways that you could get here: wind, wings, or waves. And it was definitely a different time, right? We're talking going back the main Hawaiian Islands. We don't even know, because so many of the islands have become submerged. We don't actually know how many millions of years that this hotspot has been bubbling, but we do know that the main Hawaiian Islands range from about 5 million to here on this island. You have the Kohala Mountains that are about 600,000 years old, all the way to Puna, where you have like 4 years old lava. So you have this long range, even within our existing main Hawaiian Islands today, that over that span of time, 5 million years ago, the Earth looked very different from it did today. And the biological organisms were in much different concentrations before humans started changing the face of the world. So when we talk about things like wings, it's not just animals who flew here. There would have been massive, massive flocks of birds back in that time that could get lifted up and carried in the atmosphere and blown out here. That's how we suspect that we got our honey creepers, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And then we have things like plants, again, seeds getting lifted and carried on the wind, or seeds being stuck to a bird or inside the gut of a bird, right? So all of these sort of very strange ways for things to get here. It was a pretty rare event for any species to be able to get across that 2,000 miles of ocean and then arrive and be able to survive, because maybe the food source wasn't here, or the nutrients weren't here. So probably lots and lots of things got here and never survived. And then even if they survived, were they able to mate? Were they able to reproduce, right? So those are all the barriers that it would take for a species to actually get here and become part of the ecosystem here. And scientists estimated that happened once about every 35,000 years. So, that's an average, right? You might have had two in 1,000 year span and then nobody for 100,000 years. But that kind of introduction into a system happening at such a slow rate really allows for that new organism to be able to come into balance with the ecosystem, right? It's like, okay, well, this is a new thing, but every 35,000 years, the ecosystem can kind of respond at that level. And so you see the development, that evolution over thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years of these species that start to change to reflect what's happening on this island and what food sources are available and what environmental types are available, so that what we get is a bunch of very unique species that all descend from whatever magic ancestor was able to get here. And the biggest example of this is our native Hawaiian honey creepers. If again, going back to that high school biology class, if you remember, they talked about Darwin going down to the Galapagos Islands, and he had those 13 finches that he realized just by looking at body morphology, like, hey, these 13 finches are different species now, but they all came from a common ancestor. And Darwin would have just had a field day if he had ever been able to get to Hawaii, because what we have here is we have 52 bird species that we know descended from one finch, one honey creeper finch that came from Asia, most likely, and this is based on genetics. And all of these birds, 52 species of birds, descended from one species of bird, and that is a really high level of endemism that we have here in Hawaii. It makes it this place is very unique and attracts biologists from all over the world to study evolution here, because it is such a great example of these processes. I don't want to forget, though, that it's not just birds. Birds always get the headlines. They're very charismatic, but I think it's really cool that the same thing is going on for plants. It's going on for fungus. It's going on for mosses, all kinds of stuff. And insects. We scientists have identified at least 5,000 native insect species found only in Hawaii, and those are unique to our islands, and trace that back to probably only about 450 introduction events. So probably only about 450 ancestor species got here, and then we have 5,000 natives. And our native bugs are often very unusual and very different from bugs in other places. So we have bugs that adapt all kinds of weird stuff just because Hawaii is a very different type of ecosystem than most continental systems. And I don't know if you've seen this, but in the headlines just these last couple of weeks, it's been big news, been national news, international news, that scientists over at Manoa discovered the bone collector caterpillar. And if you haven't read about this, I highly recommend. There's a link to one of the press releases here, but just type in bone collector caterpillar Hawaii. And this is a really such a unique adaptation. Most caterpillars are not carnivorous. Hawaii developed a bunch of species of carnivorous caterpillars, and this one collects the bodies of insects that have been killed by a spider, and the bodies fall down, and then the insect makes a little cocoon and it hides under the spider. So if the spider doesn't know it's there because it thinks it's just dead body parts, and then it like waits for stuff to drop out of the spider's web, and then it scavenges. So really unique adaptation, but that's the kind of cool stuff that we have here in Hawaii. I'm a science nerd, so I have to bring it up. Okay, so we have this sort of developing ecosystem over millions of years, and eventually, 1,500 years ago, we get our first big change in the form of humans. Humans tend to change environments wherever they go, and that is the case with Hawaii as well. So the first humans came, and of course, the things that we like to bring with us generally revolve around food, at least initially. And so you have your first introduced species, right? So we have the native species, which are the things that got here on their own or descended from things that got here on their own. And now you have your first introductions. These are things that did not get here on their own, right? An ulu is not gonna like bounce across the ocean and just wash up on the shore, right? It had to be brought, it had to be nurtured, right? Kalo had to be brought and nurtured. So these are plants that have close relationships with humans, and you'll notice that these don't tend to be plants that just sort of spread wild on their own and go up into the forest, or just spread out, because they do have this relationship with humans that's been developed, that these are plants that are especially cultivated, and so it tends to be something where there's a relationship between the human and the plant. But these introductions, sometimes people get caught up on the terminology. Introduced doesn't carry any weight or any meaning. It just means that's how the thing got here. Doesn't mean good or bad. It's just it got here with human help. Unfortunately, there's a subset of introduced species that are harmful. And around the world, it's about 10 to 15%. In island systems, it's more on the 15% end because we have, islands are more vulnerable. But even with the first humans, you start to see the introduction of the first harmful species, which are rats and our dogs that were brought in very early. And those immediately started going after the birds, the ground nesting birds. Hawaii used to have, you guys are familiar with nene, which is an endangered, or actually it's just been delisted to threatened, bird here in Hawaii, our state bird. And there used to be two other very large ground nesting goose that lived in Hawaii, and they both went extinct many, many years ago, so many years ago that there's no recorded name for those. They're called moanalu because they're just the lost birds. So we did start to see extinctions with the arrival of humans. And that harmful species gets that term invasive. So once the species is introduced, that's half the definition, is that it has to be introduced. It has to come in with human help. The second half of that definition of invasive species is that it's going to cause harm. It's something that's going to cause harm. And specifically, this is spelled out in federal law, and it was adopted. That was in 1999, and it was adopted by the Hawaii State Legislature in the year 2000. They adopted a similar definition. Has to cause harm to the environment, the economy, or human health. And when Hawaii adopted that definition for the state, they also added way of life, which reflects that Hawaii has unique cultural and lifestyle aspects that can also be harmed by invasive species. So you have sort of, this is the line between whether something is simply introduced or something is actually invasive. And when it's harmful in one of these areas, that's when it would be considered invasive. And then you have sort of like mildly invasive, and then you have super invaders, which are the ones that we're probably mostly familiar with, and you see some of those there on the right-hand side of the screen. Okay, invasive species. When, like I had mentioned, we had a few in the very beginning with humans coming to Hawaii, but when we really start to see this ramp up is in the 1700s, when Hawaii starts to change and you have the whaling industry coming in. That brings people from all over the world, and then now you have stuff coming from all over the world and being brought in, right? And I always connect this, and it's sort of like, how does this connect? Whaling kind of led to the downfall of those birds, those 52 species that I told you about, those honey creepers. We have a very big problem with having lost many of our birds, and we're still losing our birds. And I can connect that to whales, because whales eat forest birds. No, they actually don't. But what does happen is when you have all these people coming in, these whalers, all those ships have to travel for all that 2,000 miles or further, right? They have to travel. And unlike Va'a, where the water is, fresh water is continuously distilled, these ships would bring water in barrels so that the ships would have fresh water for the sailors on board. And unfortunately, when you're scooping up fresh water from some stream over in, somewhere in the Philippines or something, what you're going to end up with is mosquitoes in that barrel. And so what we saw was around the same time, you see this introduction of hunting as a concept, where you have pigs going up into the forest, and there's sort of a synergy between pigs who create these wallows and make lots of freshwater puddles throughout the forest, and you have breeding ground for mosquitoes. And those mosquitoes, unfortunately, carry diseases that our native birds were not able to fight off, because they had had no exposure to them for millions of years. So they had no defenses. So we see a connection between these invasive species being brought in, and it's not exactly, it's very easy to think, oh, rat comes in, eats a bird egg. But there's also these cascading effects that happen when you have a new species that's brought into an environment. Okay, so unfortunately, out of those 52 endemic honey creepers, that's just those little forest birds that I was talking about, we only have 18 left, and 6 of them are critically endangered. And those are the ones that have been making the news with birds, not mosquitoes, right? On Maui, we're losing a lot of that habitat to mosquitoes, unfortunately, and that's bringing those diseases in. We have the Kauai o'o, which, if you've not ever heard of this bird, if you have a strong stomach, or you're able to find a few minutes and you're not afraid of crying a little bit, Google the Kauai o'o last song, because that bird was recorded, the last male was recorded in the late 1980s in the forest calling for a mate that did not exist. That was the last bird to exist. And so, I'm looking at all your faces. I'm pretty sure most of you, like me, were around in 1987. That bird went extinct in our lifetime. And this is still happening, where we're losing our birds every year. So the moral of the story with invasive species is that you just see a lot of rapid change. And what happened over that period of time, we went from one species every 35,000 years. You have the first humans that came in, and the average there turned out to be about, one species every 25 years, which is a lot faster than 35,000 years. But then you get to the 1700s, 1800s, and you start seeing just so many species, just dozens and dozens of species brought in every year, until you're getting hundreds and hundreds of species. Now, those are introduced, hundreds and hundreds of introduced species. Lychee is an introduced species. However, is it invasive? No, because it doesn't meet that standard of harm. Albizia, also brought in the early 1900s, and that meets the standard of harm, economic harm, potentially human health, right? Because they're very dangerous trees, and definitely environmental harm. So it actually is one of those super invaders, because it hits all 3 categories. But that's, that the more species you're introducing, the higher chance that some of them are going to be invasive. And in fact, in island systems, and this tracks here in Hawaii, across the world in island systems, invasive species are the #1 driver of biodiversity loss. So we have we have continental systems where habitat loss is the #1 driver, but here in an island system, it's invasive species. And invasive species is a form of habitat loss, because what you see in ecosystems is that as invasive species move in, they change the habitat so that native species can no longer live there and use it. So it's just another form of habitat loss. And getting to today, right? We talked about that timeline of all these things that move in, and how impactful they are. when you have high numbers moving in. And in 2002, the coordinating group on alien pest species did a study, and I believe this was done at the port in Maui, where they basically looked at what was being intercepted, what they could find, and they found that on average, Hawaii, this is in 2002 now, so this is even old data, that Hawaii was getting one new insect species a day. So we went from one new species of any kind every 35,000 years to one every 25 years to hundreds and hundreds a year to now just insects alone. We're getting 365 insects alone every year minimum, because that since 2002, global traffic and cargo coming into Hawaii has certainly increased. Now, they still have to face those same barriers that I talked about earlier. They still have to survive, and they still have to reproduce. And that's not going to happen for all of them. A lot of them, they get here and they just kaput. But about 17 are estimated to survive long enough to naturalize and establish. So we're looking at 17 insects a year. And we don't know if those will become invasive or not. And again, with sort of these synergies and these related impacts, we have something like ambrosia beetles. Those are these teeny, tiny little bugs that if you're having a glass of wine or a beer at night, they're attracted to alcohol, so they'll like fly into your alcohol. For some reason, like women tend to fly like at your chest and fall down into your shirt. It's very annoying. But these little teeny, tiny bugs, if you see those are ambrosia beetles. And we have some native ambrosia beetles. They're important in a forest ecosystem because they are decomposers. But we did over the years start to get some non-native ambrosia beetles. Now, those were just introduced. They weren't harming anything. They weren't doing anything bad. They're just out in the forest, also out there doing decomposing work. And then we got Rapidohea death. And now we know that there is a connection between those beetles and Rapidohea death, that those beetles are facilitating the spread of the fungus that causes Rapidohea death. So it went from introduced species to invasive species because now we have a harm that's happening. So that's sort of the trick with invasive species is that there has to be that tie-in with harm. And unfortunately, all of these things coming to Hawaii, we know that live plant imports are the number one pathway for this. There's a lot of focus, I think, especially recently on tourism and, people on the plane filling out the form and stuff. But it's actually really low numbers. Where we're getting our invasive species is things being shipped. And particularly with insects, where they're hiding out is inside live plant materials. So that's always a huge concern as a pathway. Invasive species, how do you go after them? How do you respond, right? We're kind of establishing these things have a lot of huge impacts. So what do you do? Well, the best thing to do is prevent. Just keep them from coming in, right? And we do that at the ports by inspections and having rules and sort of pre-border stuff where you work with where the location where that shipment is coming from and work with the growers or work with the producers there to try and do some best management practices on that side before it even gets on a ship or a plane, right? So prevention is number one. And that's our Hawaii State Department of Agriculture for stuff that's coming domestically, and then the United States Department of Agriculture for things that are coming internationally. So that's prevention. But if something slips through, and things slip through, as I say all the time, you are now really, the onus is on you to do early detection. Find it as fast as you can. And that just is intuitive, right? The earlier you find it, that means the smaller the population is, the better chance you have that you're going to get ahead of it. And if you can find it, you can get rid of it. You can eradicate. And that's where BISC does a lot of our work. We do a lot of our work in early detection, really looking particularly with plants. We're looking for those early invaders and assessing them and figuring out, okay, is this something that we can eradicate? And we do that with a lot of things. Unfortunately, it's very hard sometimes. Coconut rhinoceros beetle is kind of a unique case because it's making big headlines, because it's in Oahu and people can see the damage. But with a lot of invasive species, it's very hard to get people to take action because it's not causing a problem yet, right? it's like if it's a very small number, then the time period in which you can actually go after it, nobody's heard of it, nobody's paying attention because it doesn't seem like a big deal. It's not, it's not affecting me. And by the time it really gets widespread and it hits the news and it's a big deal, you're way past the eradication point and it becomes really hard to push it back. So I hate to sort of throw Oahu under the bus here a little bit, but they did kind of help us out by having such a bad CRB invasion because we're still, way early in our coconut rhinoceros beetle efforts. And the reason that we have such great public awareness is because people can see what's happening on another island. We don't always have that advantage. And what eventually happens is that you get to a point where there just aren't enough resources. Sometimes there simply aren't methods. That can be something, especially early on in an invasion, where there isn't a method for control, and it can take a few years. That happened with little fire ants. It got to the Big Island, and the methods just weren't there. And it took several years for the Hawaii Ant Lab to form and then develop methods. And so when you have that kind of barrier that can lengthen the amount of time and you start to get into these orange and red areas. And once you get into that red area, you're looking at management. And management can look a lot of different ways. So management can look like containment. We have a few species of plants that they're only in one area of the island, and we're just treating the outliers and trying to keep it there because we don't have a way to actually control the main population. But, you can get all the way up to something like pigs, where pigs are just widespread. And now you have to do exclusion. So you have to find areas that you really want to protect from pigs, and you have to exclude those. And that's on the far end of management. So, those are basically your options with controlling invasive species. So I'll introduce you now to my biscuits. I have a crew of about 18. And we are split into teams. We work all across the island, and I always, I don't have to tell you guys, but I always include this little map. It's like a tourist kind of thing, but we put it in everything especially when we do presentations for our colleagues on Oahu, to remind people that this is a very big island. So when we're dividing up resources, it's always like, oh, let's make it even. And I'm like, okay, well, even across the islands is not exactly fair to the Big Island. This is a lot of places on the Big Island that we have to go. But we do work even though we're based in Hilo, we do work all over the island. So we work in every district. We have projects in every district, and we do outreach in every district. And we're split into teams generally, although everybody when you have an 18-person organization, everybody's kind of helping everybody else out. So there's a lot of overlap, but generally we have our legacy is plant control. As I said, we do a lot of work on early detection and control of newly invading plants. And luckily the timeline for plants is a lot longer than that for insects. So we have you can have a 10 or 20 year window rather than, a 2-year window for eradication. So we have several species that we work on for eradication, containment, exclusion, depending on where it is on that invasion curve, right? And we're very proactive with our early detection of plants. We have botanists that go out and actively look for plants. We're now using iNaturalist. People are reporting invasive plants, and when we have a good hit that we think that's a correct identification, our team will go to that location to see if that really is the plant that is being put up on iNaturalist. So that, that technology, that crowdsourcing has been really helpful and made us much more efficient. Then we have our forest response team. So these guys really are the main team that works on rapid ohia death, which at this point we provide a lot of research, field crew help for our scientists that are working on rapid ohia death, and we do the monitoring for how rod is progressing on this island. We train the teams on the other island in rod response. This crew used to do a lot of albizia mitigation on the Big Island, although we have very little funding at this point coming in for albizia. And they're also our drone team. So we've done drone imaging for many years now on different species and on rod, and we've just added the capacity to do spraying of herbicide and insecticide from drones. So that's a new capacity that we're going to be looking to use in the next year. And then of course we have our outreach team, which is actually my most educated team. They have to know a lot about a lot of species. So they have to keep a lot of information in their minds, and they are out all the time developing programs, working with communities, giving presentations, but they also do inspections. They're also doing, that's my team that includes the folks who are doing the botany, doing the plant investigations, all kinds of programs. And you know what that looks like. If you are interested, there's a little QR code there in the corner where you can actually go onto our website and you can see the names of all these plants that we are working to eradicate from the island, or that are in a containment or exclusion strategy. And we actually go to community meetings and we share about this, or we work with folks that are on field crews from other organizations, so that when their folks are in the field, they're able to keep an eye out for these plants. Plant crew can do that looking for these plants can take you anywhere from a backyard. We do a lot of work just right in people's backyards, right on the side of the road, to places where you're so far out that your supplies have to be helicoptered in. You have to be helicoptered in. So this crew goes everywhere. They spend about half the year on camp trips. They're actually camping in some of these places because they're so remote. So they're everywhere. You could see them walking along the side of the road one day, and then the next day they're in the back of Kohala Mountain. So pretty intense job. And then again, this is our forest response team. They do a lot of helicopter work, doing the monitoring. They, train communities on Albizia. And we actually have a job opening on this team right now. So if that team probably does camping about a third of the year, so a lot less camping than the other one, but still a lot of out in the field, heavy duty stuff. And on this team, you get to get helicopter trained and UAV trained. And so it's a really good starting job for folks who want to get into natural resources. And then, we have our outreach team, which does a lot of community support. We have a community support HOE program for little fire ants. So we do a lot of training on that. We've had that for 10 years. With the plant detection, one of the things that we try to do is we're trying to, that first level of prevention, we're trying to have less plants being brought in. 99% of plants in the world are completely legal to bring into Hawaii. We have almost no restrictions on plant imports at all. It does not matter if that plant, the scientists have rated that plant as super invasive. Most of them are still legal to be able to bring in here and sell in a store and plant. And so we have this voluntary program called Plant Pono, where nurseries can sign up to become endorsed. And they just have to agree not to sell invasive plants, and also to do best management practices for some of these insects and diseases and bugs that are going around, that they agree to really take care of the plants that they're selling and make sure that they're not, to the best of their abilities, that they're not spreading invasive species. And then the other half of that is this is an online resource that folks can go on to plantpono.org, and they can look up a plant. If they are thinking of buying something and they want to know if it's invasive, this will tell them if it's invasive. And then by using the Find a Pono Plant selection, it gives you a whole drop-down menu of like, oh, I want a plant that's like salt tolerant, I want a plant that's drought tolerant, I want a plant that's good at this elevation. You can kind of put in your requirements, and you can find a list of native and non-invasive plants that you could then purchase and put in your yard and feel good about. We also do trainings on a lot of different things. One of the things, we work with schools a lot. One of the things we do is a teacher training on rat lungworm disease. So every couple of years, we will host a professional development course for teachers to be able to work with their classrooms on rat lungworm. And of course, we go into classrooms on a number of different invasive species. So that's a really big part of our program. And now we get to the main event, the CRB. I'm going to check the chat real quick, see if there's any questions that I missed before I go on to this. Okay. Oh, look, you guys are posting. Oh, that's great. You're posting all the links. Thank you. Okay. So coconut rhinoceros beetle, very, very big beetle. I actually have, I'm going to see if I can do this on the thing. I want to show you guys. You can see like my finger. When I say big beetle, like it's a big beetle, and that's one of the things that a lot of people think they see a big beetle, and I'm like, no, this is a big beetle. It's very large, so it's very distinctive. You're not gonna mistake it for something else. And I do get people that will say, I saw this beetle, but like a small version, like a baby version, but that is not how it works, right? They emerge in that bottom right-hand corner. You see what a larva looks like. When they emerge, when they pupate and they become an adult, that is the size. They're going to be a very large size. They don't grow through stages as an adult. So originally, this thing is native to Asia, Southeast Asia, and it goes after palms. Not even though it's coconut rhinoceros beetle, coconuts are its favorite. It also goes after fan palms, date palms, royal palms, and then there's a sort of secondary list of palms. It's got a pretty wide range. It will also go after banana and challah. So that and we're seeing that on Oahu, that it is actually going after those species because the infestation has become so bad. And how it works is that the adult beetles will fly into the crown of the palm tree, and they're looking for the growing spear, right? What we call, if you're into plants or growing, the apical meristem, that main part. And because palms are a little different than other woody trees, they're not going into sort of the trunk part like you might see with boring beetles, like the Queensland longhorn beetle. It's going into the trunk, or it's going into a limb. This is going into the one part of the plant that is the main growing part, that growing spear of the palm. And it wants to dig deep in there. That's where the nectar is. That's where the sap, the very, very nutritious, tasty stuff is that this beetle is after. So those big holes that you see, like in this picture, that's because when you have that clump where the palm is all clumped together, where everything's emerging, it has to get through all of that tissue into that center to get to the nougat, the center that it wants to chomp on. And so they're very strong. Their mandibles are their claws, they're very strong to be able to get through all of that. But once they get in there, they'll feed. They don't necessarily stay there. It's not like something like a Queensland longhorn beetle where the larvae get inside and they stay inside. This is something where the bug will fly in and then feed and leave. And so sometimes you might see a palm leaf and you think, oh no, that palm is damaged, so that palm has CRB. But that's not how it works. It's very possible that one time 4 months ago, a CRB fed on that palm and then it left. So there's not, just because you have palm damage doesn't mean you have an actual beetle in there. It's the beetle's going to keep returning back to breeding material in order to mate. So talk about that in a second. But just for the timeline, CRB had been on Oahu for 10 years. And then Kauai got a CRB in, I think, May of 2023. So we started to get kind of paranoid, and not really paranoid, because it turned out that, yes, it was coming for us too. So we had our first detection in October of 2023 in Waikoloa Village, and that was larvae. That was 6 larvae. I think this one's only showing 5 in the picture, but I think there were 6 total that were found in a decaying palm stump that somebody was digging out of their yard. It was an old palm stump. It had been, dead for a long time, and they were digging the thing out to do some more landscaping, and they found these guys inside that palm stump. So those were reported, and then after that, we started putting up a lot of traps around Waikoloa Village. And looking for them. And in April 2024, we had a hit of an adult. And within that month, we had 4 adults that we found. One was actually found on someone's lanai, and the other 3 were found in traps. And then we kept looking and looking, did not find any more in Waikoloa until September 2024. Found just 1 more in a trap in somebody's front yard. And then all of a sudden in March of this year, we had our first hit in Kona, and we've been monitoring traps at the airports and the harbors for CRB since 2017. And this was the first time that we had gotten a hit in one of those traps. So we got a hit at the Kona airport, and we had some traps since the very first detection in Waikoloa in October 23. We had worked with a lot of partners, like our Plant Pono endorsed nurseries, and our, the Hawaii Palm Society, the Hawaiian Palm Society, people that were in areas that might be high risk or might be attractive to CRB. We had worked to get more traps out across the island so that, we just had sort of better sensors all around. And the day after we found this, we went next door to Host Park, for old timers, Nelha or OTEC, as we used to call it back in the day, we found that there were 2 in a trap over there. So we knew they were in the area. And then since then, we've had, I think, 7 more beetles, 10 altogether. We've had 7 more beetles in the last few weeks. The last one was last week, and it's all sort of around that area, down into Kohana HICC and Oma Natural or open area. And then we had a couple across the highway in Keohole Ag Park, and of course a couple more in Host Park. And one of those was caught in a net trap. So that last picture there, that was at Host Park, and it was nearby where we had found a couple of the other ones. There was a big compost pile that we had inspected. The CRB team came over from Oahu. We tore that pile apart. The county gave us a truck to come out and help, get it all torn apart. And we did not find any CRB in there, but we with help from county guys, we were able to set up a log trap. So we wrapped it in net. And then last week we caught a beetle trying to get in there because the beetle is smelling those decomposing logs, and it's like, oh, that's going to be good breeding material. So it's trying to get in, and then it gets caught in the net. So we had one caught in a net trap last week. What is happening? Again, really important to remember, the adults are what cause the damage, but the adult is only like a short lifespan, right? Like they don't, most insects spend their life in that baby to teenager stage and not so much in the adult. Adults kind of emerge like eat and mate. That's their like whole thing is reproduction. But most of the lifespan is spent something else. So about half, little over half the adult, the CRB's life is spent is not in a palm tree at all. Unless it's in decomposing stump. You have your egg, and then you have all your instars, and then you have your pupa, and then you have your adult. So all of these stages, this whole stage, most of the life cycle is spent in breeding material, which is decomposing stuff. They really like decomposing palms, but they'll be in any kind of mulch or compost or anything that's got some moisture. They like to dig down, and that's where they're going to spend most of their life. So we ask people to really be conscious, especially like these decaying stumps. If you have a decaying stump in your yard and you're in Waikoloa or Kona, you kind of want to take a second look at that. And I'll tell you about our secret weapon in a minute. But, any kind of decomposing palm waste, we want that to go to a facility. People have this tendency in some places to just sort of dump stuff on the side of the road. Taking this to the county facility where it can be managed, the green waste facility, it's worth the extra drive. So like spread that message, because these sort of unmanaged green waste sites is where they saw a lot of spread on Oahu, is just like places where there wasn't the heating and there wasn't the management. But where we're really concerned is trying to find a breeding site. We have not yet found one since that very, very first stump in October 2023. In Kona or Waikoloa. We've not yet found, we don't know where they are. And you can imagine it's something like a needle in a haystack looking for these guys inside a pile of decomposing material. But that's where they are for most of their lifespan. We do have a big interagency effort. I don't even think everybody's on here that is working together. The Oahu CRB response team has been working really heavily with us. The Hawaii Invasive Species Council, which runs that airport and shipport program that we participate in. The Hawaii Department of Agriculture has been out there treating just a couple hundred trees at this point that they're pre-treating to try and make the tree so that if the beetle tries to feed on it, the beetle is going to die. And then, of course, the county has been, just supercharged with like, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? Because we all don't want this. And so we just have a lot of partners that are working together on this. Huge interagency effort. And that's the panel trap. If you see those around, that's a trap for CRB. There's a little pheromone that goes in the center right there, and then the beetles hit that because they're trying to get to the pheromone, and they go whoop, in a funnel down into the cup, and they're trapped there. They cannot take off from there because they're not helicopters. They're more like planes. They have to run, and so once they're in there, they're caught. But what we've been doing is getting a lot of traps out there, doing a lot of palm surveys. But again, palm surveys only tell you where the beetle was, and it's a good indicator of maybe how long. We just did a lot of palm surveys all around the Kona Airport and Keohole Ag Park and Kohana HICC. No palm damage, which means the beetles were not there 4 months ago. right? Because we would start seeing palm damage. We've seen no palm damage. So it gives you a timeline on like what is happening and where they are in the area. We have been working with the community and Parks and Rec and just everybody that has a role here to get as many traps out into these two communities as possible. And that's really been helping us to keep track of where they are. And we also have traps all around the island. This is not the only locations. We have a heavy density of traps because we know the beetles are there, but we want to make sure that we're not caught off guard and pick them up as early as possible. Remember back to that invasion curve, right? The earlier, the better. So we're working on doing that. Again, with like, sometimes it feels like a needle in a haystack, but you got to do it. We're out there looking at these mulch piles, digging through, looking for evidence. This is Stacy from HGOA was out there with us. And this is when the CRB response team was on island. And we were digging through these mulch piles in the hot sun and going to all the locations and every nursery that had a mulch pile and saying, can we dig through your dirt? Looking for these breeding sites. And we do ask that they use best management practices. And then again, the county is using best management practices. And I'm not going to get too deep into what those exactly are, but it's to heat the pile enough to make sure that it's killing off everything that's in there. And then here's our secret weapon. This is Manu, who is a CRB sniffing dog. And so we're really encouraging folks that might have that decaying palm stump or some kind of, material in the backyard, that if you are willing, and if you're in Waikoloa, and for those businesses that are near the airport, that we'll bring Manu out and we will do a run around to see if we can find any breeding stuff out there. And of course, we're doing tons and tons of public outreach, and we're working with Waikoloa School quite closely to really get the word out to all the kids and their families. So you'll see our team out there doing a lot of that. And then here's the reporting. So I don't know if you want to screenshot that or, you can post that somewhere, but this is if you have anything that you suspect might be palm damage, any larva that you suspect could be CRB, then get in touch with us. We have a text, we have an email, we have a Facebook, we have an Instagram. Send us a picture. Just, pictures are really important. Please get a picture and hold on to it if you find something, so that if we do look at that picture and go, uh-oh, that looks suspect to us, that we can actually get the organism itself. We've had people call us and say, we think we have CRB. And then we're like, great, well, come get the larva. And then they're like, oh, I fed it to my chickens already. Well, I can't do anything with that. So I really need to have the organism itself. And again, this is just another, all of our social media. We are very active on social media. So if you are into Facebook or Instagram, we also have a YouTube channel with a lot of information on different invasive species and our website. So please take advantage of those resources. And I will end there.
All right. Thank you, Franny. Anybody have any questions?
I do. Franny, this is Keith Merrick. I just emailed you, but we have a tree up in our area that is starting to take over. So I figured you might be interested in seeing it early. It's similar to Albizia, and then it just spreads everywhere and it gets really big. Milestone does kill it, but it takes a lot longer to kill it than it does Albizia. So I shared that with you.
Yes. It's in my email, you said?
Yep.
I will look at it. Yeah. I'll get back to you for sure. Anybody, yeah, anytime you guys have anything weird, bug, plant, whatever, please send it to us. We'd much rather say, oh no, we know about that. Or maybe we could share some control methods with you, but we'd rather get 10 of the same thing over and over again than miss one thing.
And I think I'll add on to Franny's presentation and just, share some facts or some points of interest for the rest of you, is that we don't want it to come to the east side because the east side is so moist and there's so much areas that it could breed. And once it decides to go from their primary food source, which are palms and coconut trees, it'll go into the secondary food sources like bananas, ulus, possibly taro is one of the things that they said that it could be eating. And that will definitely affect our food system. All the different crops that we would eat here is at risk. So we would like to try and eradicate it off our island. If you do have mulch piles, spread your mulch. Keep it, pretty thin or turn it. But yeah, we're trying our best right now to try and find these beetles, figure out what a breeding ground is, and keep it from crossing the mountain into more moist territory.
I have a
that's
question.
right.
Yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
Does the CRB have any natural predators that could help us?
So what keeps it in check in its home range? There's a virus called a nudibvirus, and then there's a fungus. So there are a couple of things that keep it in check. And that was actually, when this thing started spreading, I think the first case of it becoming invasive in South Pacific Island was in the early 1900s. And they were able to bring those biocontrols into those islands, and it kept it under control. And then when it got to Guam, which I think was in the 90s, maybe early 2000s, the variety that got to Guam evolved resistance to the virus. And so it sort of created a new wave of CRB. So there was like this original wave of CRB that went to like the 50s, and like they were able to get that eventually under control. And then CRB, where it would show up, it was not too bad. And then in the 90s or 2000s, whenever it got to Guam, it took off again. And now this new one is not controlled by that virus. So there's a lot of research going on right now to figure out. They originally thought the one we had in Hawaii was the Guam type, but there is some genetics that just came out last year. They're saying that might not be accurate, or maybe the population that we did get, even if it came from Guam, is maybe not necessarily that type. So there's potential that if the nudibvirus could be studied here to see if it's impactful. We do have a native scarab beetle on Kauai that could be impacted, so that could be something that could hold back from the biocontrol being able to be released, at least on that island. But so there is research going on to see if that nudibvirus can be brought into Hawaii and whether that would actually affect our CRB here. And then UH has been doing some research on the fungus for the last 3 or 4, maybe even a little bit longer than that. For several years. Right now, that fungus is already present on Oahu, and so they're just kind of trying to scale it up and see if they can get it out. But it only had about a 10% to 15% fatality rate. So there are different, funguses have lots and lots of different varieties, right? So they're looking at different varieties of that fungus and seeing if maybe they can get a more lethal one. So there's a lot of work that's being done on hopefully finding a biocontrol.
Thank you. Can I ask a question? When we're done with the CRB, I have a question about the little fire ants.
Sure. Alan, you have a question?
Yeah, how successful has that wasp that was released to control the YV guava tree? How successful?
That was a scale. Yeah, it wasn't a wasp. That particular one was a scale insect, and it's really good. It's slowing down now that they have about 10 years, a little more than 10 years of data, they can definitely see where it's heavy. It's slowing down the growth of the strawberry guava. So you're getting shorter strawberry guava, you're getting less fruit, which is what the hope was. The issue is just that it takes a long time for it to spread. It's slow. So getting it into an area can be a challenge. And where they really need it is like in deep forest. So right now, DLNR is working with the Institute for Pacific Islands Forestry up here in Hilo to come up with methods to airdrop it into the canopies that are deep in the watersheds. So kind of an interesting, cool stuff going on with that.
What is a scale? What does that look like?
This particular one looks like a bump. So like it's inside the bump. So the way that Tectococcus works is that the insect, it kind of burrows into the plant, and there's a chemical signature because these are really closely evolved. This particular insect is able to tell the plant like, hi, I'm here. And then the plant makes the bubble. So what you'll see bubbles all over the leaves. And if you poke in, you'll see a little tiny insect inside of there. But scale insects can look different on different plants. So different, there's different lots and lots of different species out there. Yeah.
So the wifey trees that I have with little bumps on it, that's what it is then.
Yep, that's what it is. It's just a little bug inside there.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And people worry that that's affecting the fruit or it's not a disease. It's just a bug asking the plant to make it a home. So it doesn't affect the fruit. It just makes less fruit, but the fruit is fine. There's nothing like hurtful or painful. It's not unhealthy to eat it.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Franny, do you only have one dog?
Right now we only have one dog. We are talking about getting a second dog trained up. But at this point, we were limited until Monday with funding. So the county had, given us R&D actually had given us a big allocation that I've been waiting on for about a year just because of like all the bureaucracy with the university and the lawyers at everybody. So finally Monday we got a money that I can draw from to increase our dog surveys. So that's something we're going to talk about is whether we want a second dog.
Glenn, you want to talk about little fire ants?
Yeah, if I could. Every now and then you have outreach at whatever, some kind of fair or gathering. When you have those, do you think you could whip up that liquid spray for little fire ants to spray onto trees? Because I've seen the videos how to make them, but then you got to make up a 5-gallon bucket, and for the regular residential person, that's way too much. Maybe you could
We
whip up some and then
we
just
probably wouldn't do it at every booth just because it's really messy and not every I don't think every venue is going to want us to do that. But what we do is we do neighborhood demonstrations. So if you wanted to get your neighbors together and we'll come out for free and we'll do it, and then we give you the bait. So like if you want to get your neighbors together and we'll do a class, then we'll mix it up right there, and then we give everybody that bait and you can just go apply it that day. So it's like your first treatment is free, and then we keep you on a schedule for 12 months, and each month we send reminders, and then we'll come back at 6 months and we'll bring bait again, and we'll give you another treatment for free, just to kind of like get everybody kind of understanding the different treatments that are out there, and the habit of doing this on a monthly basis. And then we'll come out again at 12 months to do a troubleshoot with everybody. So we have a whole program that if you want to get your neighbors together, we're happy to tailor it to you and your neighborhood.
terrific. We'll do it at Alan's house.
Okay.
I have a lot. Along with that, I wanted to find out, are those ant bites cumulative, the negative effects of it?
I'm sorry, I missed it. Are the ant bites?
Yeah, do they add up to become something worse eventually? Because I get about 2 bites every time I'm out in the yard, and I work in the yard about 4 or 5 times a week, and I always
We should definitely get you with a better treatment plan. You're paying for a treatment plan; it's not working. But yeah, that I don't know. I don't know the medical side of it. It's actually a sting that the ants are putting a little bit of venom in there, and I have no idea what the long-term impacts of those are. I know that some people build up a tolerance for it and don't get as bothered over time if they're getting a lot, but other people will get horrible impacts. And I don't really know why some people, it doesn't seem to bother them, and other people have a horrible reaction. It might have to do with your own body's response.
Okay. Well, nobody's saying that I'm becoming obnoxious, so I guess that's not working then for me.
You can't blame the ants.
All right, everybody, we're at our end of our time here, but I just wanted to mention that, the state legislature has been supportive of invasive species containment, mitigation. They've increased funding by a little bit this year. But, we as a community have to continue to try and, advocate for, supporting BISC, supporting the Department of Ag, because it's a collaborative effort, especially with our current CRB effort is, Franny and her team may be out there checking traps and they find that there's a beetle, and then they're going to say, okay, well, can Department of Ag now spray these trees so that if the beetles come back, they'll eat it, they'll die. But then they have to reach out to County of Hawaii for our boom trucks to get to the trees. So it's a real big effort here. And we, continue to ask for the community support in helping us with the engagement, detection, calling up Franny and her team saying, I think there's something here. Because if we don't do that, we won't know where these invasive species are. They'll continue to grow, and we don't want our situation to be like Oahu or Kauai. So just wanted to put that out there. But we have the links here shared in the chat. We have Franny's email. You can contact her directly. I really appreciate everybody on this call. And next month's meeting is actually going to be a joint meeting. We're going to have a presentation on astronomy. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, Franny. Great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Franny.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you